They thought it was over for you. They saw you broken, silent, and almost invisible, and whispered that you'd never rise again. But what they didn't know is that your silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Because when God moves, it's never small. And now, God is about to do the impossible in your life. It began on a cold morning, the kind of morning that smelled like endings. The air was heavy, the sky overcast, and Ion stood outside the courthouse, hands trembling with a mixture of fear, shame, and numbness. Behind those thick wooden doors, his world had collapsed. Business gone, reputation shredded, and worse, betrayed by the very people he once called family. They had taken everything. Or so they thought. 6 months ago, Ion had everything. A booming tech startup, respected his community, a loyal team, and plans to expand internationally. He had earned every piece of it with late nights, missed birthdays, and quiet prayers whispered in the dead of night, when no one was watching. He was known as a man who built his empire with integrity. But integrity doesn't protect you from betrayal. His cousin, Hamid, had been his business partner from the start, charismatic, charming, and underneath it all, a wolf in disguise. While Ion handled the vision and hard work, Hamid handled the numbers and cooked them too. For months, Hamid had been funneling funds into offshore accounts, forging documents, and bribing their legal counsel. And when it all came crashing down, guess who took the fall? Ion. The headlines didn't even wait for proof. They painted him guilty in bold letters. Tech CEO caught in multi-crore fraud, they screamed. The court case that morning wasn't a verdict. It was the beginning of an endless spiral. Ion wasn't just losing his wealth. He was losing everything that made him him. His name, his peace, his faith. He went home that night to an empty apartment. Furniture sold. Friends disappeared. Even his fiancée, Sanaa, had quietly left, leaving behind nothing but goodbye texts that read, "I can't do this anymore. I hope you understand." He didn't understand. Not then. For weeks, he lived like a ghost, barely speaking, barely eating. The silence in his apartment was so thick it pressed against his chest like concrete. Every night, he stared at the ceiling, replaying every decision, every moment, every misplaced trust. And in the quiet, that's when the real voices came. Not whispers of people, but the deeper voice, the divine one, the one that doesn't shout, but shakes your soul. Do you trust me still? It wasn't a loud voice. It wasn't even a sentence he could explain to others, but it echoed inside him like a sacred tremor. Ion scoffed at first. Trust? Look where that got me. But silence answered back with more silence. And then a flicker, not in the room, but in his spirit. The next day, something shifted. He didn't have money, but he had a whiteboard. He didn't have a team, but he had an idea. He didn't have a platform, but he had pain. And sometimes pain is the most powerful foundation. He began writing again, sketching ideas, brainstorming solutions to the problems he once ignored while chasing profit. And every night, before sleeping, he began praying again, not because he expected miracles, but because he missed the voice, the real voice, the one that didn't lie like the world did. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, he got freelance work online. It wasn't much, but it paid the rent. Then came an idea, an AI tool for students with learning disabilities. It was niche. It wasn't trendy, but it was pure. It had purpose. He reached out to investors, got rejected over and over. One email said, "Your reputation precedes you. We don't fund liabilities." But he kept going, one day at a time, one prayer at a time. And then the impossible started unfolding. A small educational nonprofit in Canada stumbled upon his prototype through a mutual LinkedIn connection. They didn't care about the headlines. They cared about the heart behind the product. They gave him a grant, small, but enough to build version 1. And when they launched it in 3 schools, the feedback was staggering. Ion cried the night he got that first report, not because it was a business win, but because a child who couldn't focus for more than 10 minutes had spent an hour learning with joy. He remembered what the voice said. "Do you trust me still?" 1 month later, a major investor approached him, not because he pitched, but because someone else talked about his project at a conference. They offered to scale the software globally, starting with the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Just like that, the man the world declared as finished was standing at the beginning of something greater than what he'd originally built. But the story doesn't end here, because the twist wasn't just that Ion came back. It's how he came back, with clarity, with humility, with fire in his soul and calm in his mind. He no longer wanted revenge. He wanted purpose. Yes, Hamid's betrayal still echoed. Yes, the scars were real. But so was the strength that was born in that silence. Ion didn't just rebuild. He transformed. The people who left, he thanked them silently. They made space for the ones God was about to send. Better ones. Real ones. And when a journalist came to ask for his comeback story, Ion didn't talk about how he beat the system. He talked about the nights he almost gave up, and the one night he didn't. The night he whispered a single prayer and got no answer. Until now. You see, the impossible doesn't happen when you fight harder. It happens when you surrender smarter. When you stop clinging to what broke you and start reaching toward what can heal you. God isn't late. God isn't silent. God is strategic. He breaks you down to rebuild you right. Not for them, not for claps, but for purpose. So if you're in that room right now, staring at the ceiling, wondering why your world has fallen apart, don't despair. Don't panic. You're in the phase before the impossible. Because God is about to write a story through you that others will whisper about in awe. And when he moves, even your enemies will say, only God could have done that. So breathe, stand still, and get ready, because God is about to do the impossible in you. They said it couldn't be done. They doubted you, walked away, gave up. But that's exactly how God moves. When the noise dies down and only faith remains, he shows up not to prove them wrong, but to prove to you that he never left. Because what's coming next isn't just a recovery, it's a resurrection. Ion woke up that morning not as a man chasing the world, but as one being carried by something greater. He had tasted loss, real loss, the kind that steals not only money or dreams, but identity. But now the tide was turning. The first major launch of his AI education tool was scheduled in 3 weeks. The pilot tests in schools had exceeded expectations. Students were improving. Teachers were crying. Parents were sending thank you notes. It all felt surreal. But as blessings rise, so do shadows. One morning, Ion received a call from his lawyer, an old friend who had quietly believed in his innocence even when the world didn't. There's been a development in your old case, the lawyer said, voice low, cautious. What kind of development? Ion asked, his pulse beginning to race. They found discrepancies in Hamid's financial records. Apparently, a junior auditor has come forward with evidence, documents he was told to destroy, but secretly archived. The court wants to reopen the investigation. Ion froze. It had been almost a year. He had let go, made peace, built something new. But now the past was crawling back, begging to be acknowledged. He wasn't sure if he should be relieved or terrified. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at his laptop screen, blinking cursor mocking his distraction. His mind wandered back to that courthouse, to the cold glares, the accusations, the shame. He could still feel it like it happened yesterday. God, why now? He whispered. And the voice returned, soft, sure, unwavering. Because now, you won't be returning as the accused. You'll be standing as the witness of what I've done in you. The next day, his name began to trend again, but this time, not in shame, in vindication. Media outlets that once tore him apart were now issuing corrections. A new investigation was launched against Hamid, who had mysteriously left the country a few months earlier. His foreign assets were frozen. Interpol had been alerted. It felt like a victory. But Ion didn't celebrate, not the way people expected him to. Instead, he went to the same small masjid he used to visit as a child. He prayed quietly, not for revenge, not even for justice. He prayed for closure. Because sometimes the miracle isn't just that the tables turn. It's that your heart doesn't grow bitter when they do. The launch day of his AI tool, named Zian, arrived with a kind of silent thunder. There was no giant banner, no glamorous press event, just a humble live stream announcement and an invite to educators and institutions worldwide. Within 48 hours, the platform received over 300 signups from educators in 11 countries. The model was working. Lives were being touched. But then another twist. Late that night, as Ion was reviewing performance metrics, he received an email. No subject line, just a message that read, "You really thought I'd stay quiet forever?" H. A chill crawled down his spine. Hamid, even oceans away, he was watching. And now, threatening. Ion closed the laptop. His hand shook, but not with fear, with fury. Old wounds threatened to rip open. His breathing grew shallow. But then, just as his panic reached its peak, a thought entered like a sharp blade cutting through smoke. This is his noise, not your downfall. God had already lifted him from ashes. He wasn't going back. The next few days were tense. He hired cybersecurity experts, had his systems audited. Everything was clean, safe. His new team, a small but loyal group of believers, stood beside him, ready for whatever came next. He realized then that doing the impossible doesn't mean things suddenly get easy. It means you're built different to face storms without falling apart. And just when he thought the divine orchestration had reached its limit, another email came. This one from a global humanitarian foundation. They had been watching Zion. They were planning a major initiative to bring accessible education tools to refugee camps across the Middle East and Africa. And they wanted Ion's platform to lead the charge. The impossible was unfolding layer by layer. Ion flew to Geneva for the meeting. He wore the same watch he wore the day he walked into that courtroom a year ago, scratched, old, but meaningful. When he entered that boardroom, heads turned, not because of his clothes, but because of the aura he carried now. One of the directors said, "We've reviewed 19 platforms. Yours doesn't just serve, it understands. It's not just data-driven. It's heart-driven. We want you on board." They offered funding, exposure, and, more importantly, a reach that would affect thousands, even millions of forgotten children. And all Ion could think was, God, you really did it. The impossible isn't about lightning striking your pain and making it disappear. It's about walking through fire so that when you emerge, you no longer need to be afraid of it. God didn't just rescue Ion. He refined him. He stripped away the false, the fragile, and the fake, and rebuilt a man who now carried storms in his stride and serenity in his spirit. So if you've been betrayed, broken, or buried beneath shame, hold on. You're not forgotten. You're not defeated. You're not done. The same God who raised Ion from public ruin to global purpose is watching you, not with judgment, but with intention. Because when it looks like you've lost everything, that's when God starts building something eternal. You are not where your story ends. You are right at the edge of the impossible. It takes one moment of divine favor to rewrite every chapter they tried to erase. You're not late. You're not forgotten. You're not behind. You are being positioned not to return to what broke you, but to rise above it with fire in your eyes and purpose in your bones. Because when God says, "I'm about to do the impossible," he means he's about to make you the evidence. Geneva was a whirlwind. After the deal with the Humanitarian Foundation was finalized, Ion found himself flying between countries, visiting refugee camps, sitting in classrooms where education was once just a dream, and watching children's faces light up as they interacted with the Zion platform. It was working, more than he imagined. But amidst the triumph, something else stirred within him. At night, when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Ion still heard echoes. Not of success, but of loss. He thought of his mother, her soft voice that used to recite prayers as he fell asleep. He remembered how she defended him with tearful eyes when the world turned cold. She wasn't here to see this. And that broke him more than anything. One evening, in a tent-turned classroom near the Syrian border, Ion watched a little girl named Rasha solve a math puzzle using Zion. She was barefoot, her clothes stitched in patches, but her eyes were fierce with focus. After class, she tugged at his sleeve and asked, Are you the man who made this magic? Ion smiled. It's not magic, just a tool. She tilted her head. My mama said God sends tools through people. Are you one of those people? He froze. Goosebumps raced across his skin. That small voice had unknowingly echoed the very truth he tried so hard to deny. God was working through him, but the impossible isn't just about building something that changes others. It's about becoming someone you no longer recognize, because who you were before the pain could never survive the calling now placed upon you. And then came the letter. Back in Karachi, while reviewing office mail, Ion stumbled across a cream envelope sealed with wax. Inside was a short, handwritten note. You once said I'd regret it. You were right. I don't ask for forgiveness. Just peace. Hamid. No threats. No excuses. Just surrender. Ion stared at the note for a long time. He thought he'd feel satisfaction, vindication, a rush of power. But all he felt was release. Because the real miracle is not when your enemies fall. It's when their grip on your spirit breaks. He burned the letter, not in anger, but as a symbol. That chapter was closed. Shortly after, Ion was invited to speak at a major international conference for educational equity. As he stood on stage, thousands of educators, technologists, and policymakers watched him. But he wasn't thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about the night he wept on his apartment floor, begging God to show him why he was still alive. This was the answer. He began to speak, not from polished notes or rehearsed lines, but from memory, from pain, from faith. I was once a man they called a fraud, he said. I had nothing left but breath. And that breath, I gave back to God, who used it to whisper a purpose I never saw coming. Silence filled the room. Not out of boredom, but reverence. They weren't just hearing a story. They were feeling the fire. After his speech, a woman approached him, elderly, kind-eyed, draped in a long shawl. You may not remember me, she said softly, but I was there at your trial. I was just a clerk. You looked broken back then. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. But now, seeing you like this, it's proof. Proof of what? Ion asked. That God keeps his promises. He smiled, not a proud smile, but a tired, grateful one, because what she said was true. And it reminded him, the impossible doesn't announce itself with thunder. It arrives quietly, in strangers, in sunsets, in small victories that echo loud in your soul. Weeks passed. Zion continued to grow. Governments were beginning to notice. Awards came. Recognition, too. But Ion remained the same, rooted in humility, dressed in simplicity, driven by prayer. One morning, he sat alone in his office as the call to prayer echoed in the distance. He opened his journal and wrote. They laughed. They betrayed. They left, but you stayed. You didn't lift me to show them. You lifted me to remind me who I am when I walk with you. That evening, his assistant walked in with news. A production team from a major network wants to do a documentary on your journey. They said your story could inspire millions. Should I schedule a meeting? Ion paused. He thought about it, then nodded. Tell them I'm not interested in being the hero. If they want to highlight the truth, that even in ruin, God builds glory, then yes, I'll speak. And that's how it began. The story of a man whose name was once dragged through mud, now etched into the hearts of those who dare to hope again. The impossible isn't when your dreams come true. It's when your wounds become windows for someone else's healing. Ion didn't chase revenge. He didn't beg for validation. He simply kept walking, step by shaky step, until the path itself parted to make way. Because when God moves, he doesn't just open doors. He remakes the building. You, who are reading this, may feel unseen. You may feel buried. But listen closely. You are not buried. You are being planted. And when the time is right, you will bloom in places they swore you'd never even reach. Because God's impossible is inevitable when your heart stays faithful. This isn't just motivation. This is confirmation. Keep going. Before the floodgates of blessings open, there's always silence. A silence that feels like rejection, but is actually preparation. Because impossible doesn't need noise, it needs alignment. And when everything aligns, hearts, faith, purpose, God doesn't knock. He enters. Now witness the moment when the waiting breaks, and the world watches what only God could orchestrate. The documentary aired across platforms in multiple languages. It was titled, Buried But Not Broken, The Rise of Ayan Qureshi. In just 72 hours, it racked up over 10 million views. But it wasn't the numbers that moved Ayan. It was the thousands of messages flooding in from people across the world. Young dreamers, wrongfully accused prisoners, single mothers, former addicts, broken men who'd lost everything and yet saw a flicker of themselves in Ayan's eyes. They all wrote one thing, in different ways. If he could rise from that, maybe I can too. Ayan didn't respond to most, but he read every word. Each testimony carved a deeper understanding in him. This journey was never about personal glory. It was about permission. Permission for others to believe again. One evening, while visiting a school in Nairobi that had just implemented Zion, a young boy named Kamau handed him a drawing. It showed Ayan standing on a mountain with light pouring from the sky. Kamau said, "You look like someone God sent to remind us not to give up." Ayan blinked back tears, not out of pride, but because even he had forgotten how deeply God works through broken vessels. But the higher you rise, the darker the clouds around you become. As Zion gained traction, large corporations who once dismissed him now saw him as a threat. He was disrupting an entire industry, one that profited from keeping low-income communities dependent. And just like that, the shadows began to move again. Anonymous articles surfaced online, accusing Ayan of manipulating refugee data. One post claimed he was pocketing donor money. The whispers returned, like phantoms of his past, clawing at his peace. He knew who was behind it. An educational conglomerate that had tried to buy Zion months ago. He'd refused. Now they were playing dirty. His legal team advised a press conference. His board suggested a PR strategy. But Ayan refused. He simply posted a single video. He sat at his desk, no music, no edits, just his voice. I've faced false accusations before. I won't dignify these with panic. I'll let the results speak. And while some chase profit, we will keep chasing purpose. Because when you walk with God, you don't fear storms. You command them to pass. And pass they did. Days later, evidence leaked exposing conglomerates' fabricated claims. Their CEO was forced to resign. And Zion? It only grew stronger. Because the more they tried to bury Ayan, the more God used the soil to grow something immovable. But the moment that shook him came in the most unexpected way. One morning, while visiting an orphanage in Turkey, he was asked to meet a new sponsor who had donated anonymously. In the small waiting room, a woman stood up, elderly, cloaked, eyes wet with age and something more. "Ayan," she whispered. He turned and time froze. It was her, the woman from his past, the one who once stood on a witness bench and refused to testify for him. His aunt, his mother's only sister. He had begged her to speak the truth during the trial, but she stayed silent, and her silence cost him everything. Now she stood before him, shaking, remorseful, broken. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, voice trembling. "I just wanted to see what God did with the boy we all gave up on." For a moment, Ayan said nothing. His heart raced. The old him might have turned away, might have said, "You don't deserve to see this." But the man he had become knew better. He gently took her hand and replied, "He didn't just change me. He changed how I see people. I forgive you." She wept, not just for him, but for who she could have been if she had believed sooner. That night, Ayan stared out over the city skyline from his hotel room, and he realized something. The impossible isn't one moment. It's a collection of moments, each one demanding surrender, each one requiring faith, each one leading to a mountain you never knew existed. But you only reach it if you refuse to sit in the valley of bitterness. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was from the United Nations. They were inviting Ayan to represent a new initiative, one that would integrate Zion across 22 nations as a primary educational tool in low-access regions. This will make you the youngest global education ambassador ever appointed. The voice said. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and remembered the tiny apartment, the cold courtroom, the stairs, the silence, the prayers whispered into emptiness. Then he opened his eyes and said, I accept, but I come not as a savior, just as proof that the grave they dig for you is often the foundation God uses to build his miracle. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You need you to believe and God to breathe on that belief. The impossible doesn't arrive with applause. It comes in the quiet return of the things they thought you'd never recover. It comes when peace replaces pride, when forgiveness replaces revenge, when purpose replaces pain. Ion didn't become a symbol because he wanted to. He became it because he refused to die in the fire, and instead became the light that walked through it. And you're next. The world may not see it yet, but heaven already knows. God is about to do the impossible in your life, not for spectacle, but so that others who've lost their way can find again by watching you rise. There comes a point where pain no longer controls you, where memories become fuel, not chains, where you no longer chase validation because you become the evidence. And that's when the impossible shifts from a promise to a living testimony. Today, Ion's storm doesn't break him. It builds him. But before the breakthrough comes full circle, there's one final battle, and it doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. The United Nations Summit in Geneva was unlike anything Ion had ever imagined. Security escorts, flags from dozens of nations, a sea of translators in glass booths, cameras from every direction. But all Ion felt was stillness. It was the kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence, but from clarity. He stepped up to the podium as the youngest education reformist in the organization's history. The delegates expected a speech about numbers, growth metrics, projections. Instead, Ion told them a story. I was once locked in a cell for a crime I didn't commit. I watched men rot from the inside out, not because they were guilty, but because no one believed their stories mattered. What saved me wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't money. It was a whisper from God that said, this is not where your story ends. So I built something for the forgotten. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Education shouldn't be a luxury. It should be a lifeline. The room went silent. No applause. No whispers. Just wait. The kind of silence that means everyone heard the truth. That night, Ion sat alone in his hotel suite, staring out at Lake Geneva. The moon hung low, like it was watching him too. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Rafik, the same journalist who once wrote a brutal piece about him years ago. I owe you an apology. I destroyed a man I didn't know. But I see you now, and I pray my own children grow up to have half your courage. Ion didn't respond, not out of malice, but because he understood something deeper now. When God elevates you, your enemies often become your witnesses, not to your greatness, but to his grace. Zian's influence spread like wildfire, not just in war-torn zones or impoverished neighborhoods, but in developed nations where children felt lost in a sea of competition and confusion. It became a movement. Teachers resigned from standardized institutions to join it. Parents began rethinking the very nature of learning. Former critics became supporters. But the higher Ion rose, the more he began hearing a faint, haunting voice, one he hadn't heard in years. It returned in dreams, in fleeting thoughts, in echoes behind every applause. You're still that prisoner, Ion, just in a bigger cell. He couldn't shake it. At first, he brushed it off. Then he buried himself in work. Then in travel. But nothing muted the whisper. One night, during a speech in Morocco, he collapsed on stage. His team rushed him to a private hospital. The diagnosis wasn't fatal, but serious. Exhaustion, adrenal fatigue, silent anxiety. His body was begging for rest. But his spirit was asking for something deeper. Healing, not for his body, for his soul. For years, he had forgiven others, but he never truly forgave himself. He never forgave himself for that one night he gave up in prison, the night He almost ended it all. The night he whispered, "God, I'm done," and expected silence, but instead heard, "Then I'll begin." That was the night God met him in the dirt, and yet he never allowed himself to grieve it. During recovery, he stayed with a local family in a quiet village near Fez. One evening, the father, a former soldier turned shepherd, took Ion up a small mountain trail. When they reached the top, the man said, "This is where I used to scream after war. I lost men. I lost friends. I lost my mind. But one day, God whispered, 'Give me your pain before it becomes your identity.' So I did." Ion didn't respond. He just broke. Tears streamed. Shoulders shook. He cried for the cell, for the betrayal, for the silence, for the forgiveness he never thought he deserved. And when it was done, he looked at the sky and whispered, "I am not what happened to me. I am what you've resurrected." And for the first time in years, he felt free. Not famous, not respected, not powerful. Free. When he returned to public life, something was different. His speeches were softer, yet more piercing. His eyes held peace, not pressure. He laughed more. He rested. He no longer tried to prove himself. Because when you're finally healed, you don't perform. You exist. And that was the real miracle. Then came the final calling. The Global Education Alliance offered to make Zion a central platform across 60 nations. Ion hesitated. This would mean stepping back from leadership and allowing new faces to carry the torch. He wrestled with it until one morning, during prayer, he heard the quiet answer in his heart. You were never meant to build an empire. You were meant to spark a revival. So he said yes. He handed over the reins, trained new leaders, stepped into mentorship, and began writing, chronicling everything from the prison years to the summit speeches. His final book was titled, "God Did the Impossible Through Me." We often chase the impossible, thinking it's a destination, a moment, a stage, a victory. But in truth, the impossible is who you become when you stop hiding your scars. It's the life that rises when death tries to write the final chapter and fails. It's the peace you find not when people clap, but when your soul whispers, "You made it and you didn't lose yourself." Ion didn't just do the impossible. He became it. And you're closer than you think. The shaking, the storms, the silence, they're not signs of your failure. They're signs that God is still forming the miracle. So don't give up, because the moment you let go of proving them wrong, God steps in to prove himself right. You didn't just survive the storm. You learned how to walk through it. You didn't just break through pain. You became the proof that healing is real. And now, God finishes what he started. This final chapter isn't about the spotlight. It's about legacy. It's about you, and the greater that's still ahead. Because when God says, "I'm about to do the impossible," he doesn't mean later. He means now. 3 years passed since Ion handed Zion to the next generation of leaders. It was no longer just a nonprofit. It had grown into a global standard of what education looked like when the soul wasn't forgotten. In refugee camps, rural villages, inner-city slums, and elite institutions, Zion had made its mark. But Ion, he had become almost invisible by choice. He lived quietly in a small home near the hills of northern Pakistan, surrounded by trees, books, and silence. No cameras, no interviews, just reflection and peace. Each morning, he walked the same dirt path toward a wooden bench carved by local students he mentored. Each night, he'd sit under the stars and journal letters addressed to tomorrow's broken ones. Not to teach them, not to save them, but to remind them they are not alone. One day, he received a letter with no sender. Inside it was a single line, "You're needed for one last journey." There was no signature, no stamp, just a return address. In Srinagar, Kashmir, a region still caught in whispers of conflict, silence, and soul-deep wounds. Ion paused. Was it nostalgia? A trap? A calling? He prayed. And the next day, he boarded a train. Srinagar was colder than he remembered. The lake shimmered with stillness, but pain still hung in the air. He met a small group of teenagers, orphans of war, trafficking survivors, and outcasts from every side of society. They had been gathering in an abandoned library. No books, just hope. They had one request. Don't teach us, sir. Just listen. We're trying to build something. But we don't know if we're allowed to dream. Ion didn't speak for the first hour. He just sat. Then he said something simple. I once dreamed in a prison. So if I can be allowed, so can you. That week turned into a month. He guided them. Not like a leader, but like a mirror, letting them see the strength they didn't know they had. They named their project Aftab, meaning the rising sun. Not a school, not a charity, a sanctuary, where brokenness wasn't shamed, where questions were safe, where truth wasn't polished but raw and sacred. One of the girls, Ruba, who hadn't spoken in years due to trauma, stood one night and whispered, I think God sent you here, because you remember what it feels like to not be believed. That night, Ion cried again, not from sadness, but from completion, because this wasn't about making noise anymore. It was about planting roots. Word spread. Governments reached out to fund Aftab. Media tried to cover it. Ion declined all offers. He said, what's sacred doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs to last. And it did. Years later, Aftab became a haven for thousands across borders, without ever marketing itself. Because when God builds something through you, it speaks without shouting. Ion's health began to decline slowly. His doctor warned him gently of a heart condition worsened by his early prison years. He didn't panic. He simply asked, do I have time to finish one last letter? And so he did. He wrote for 2 weeks straight. One letter, hundreds of pages. To you, to anyone who ever felt forgotten, thrown aside, misunderstood. It read, in part, this world will try to bury your voice. It will package your worth in degrees, wealth, applause. But the truth is, your value was set before you were even born. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are exactly where your becoming begins. Don't look for lightning. Don't wait for signs. The fact that you still breathe, still feel, still care, means God isn't done. And when he whispers, I'm about to do the impossible, don't look around for someone else. Look in the mirror. It's you. It's always been you. On a quiet Friday morning, Ion passed away in his sleep. He was 43. He left behind no money, no estate, just a bench under a tree, journals filled with letters, and thousands of hearts that would never forget what he lived for. And in every corner of the world, where a child wrote without shame, where a woman rebuilt after trauma, where a man dared to start over, you'd hear a whisper pass between them. The impossible is already happening. Maybe you're standing in ruins. Maybe your name has been dragged, your worth dismissed, your light dimmed. Maybe you've told yourself, it's too late for me. But I came to tell you, it's not, because God doesn't need perfect conditions. He needs a willing heart. He doesn't wait for applause. He moves in the quiet, yes. He is not a God of probability. He is a God of impossibility. So don't stop. Don't shrink. Don't let the weight of your wounds make you believe you're disqualified. Because the truth is, you are the miracle in motion. And the next chapter? It begins now. Just whisper it. God, I'm ready. Because he's already saying, I'm about to do the impossible through you,